Ladies and gentlemen, what the fuck is good? It's your motherfucking boy coming at you again with the motherfucking real spill of the Kennedy family and their eternal fight against the deep state and the fight for American sovereignty. So let's get right into it, shall we? You already know I had to start things off by talking about the CIA. Right after John F. Kennedy became president, the CIA failed an invasion into Cuba. They were pissed at John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, he blamed the CIA, in which it was the CIA's fault. Can't really blame John F. Kennedy for this, in my opinion. But John F. Kennedy, he said, how could I have been so stupid to let them proceed? And he even vented his desire to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. Now, this is going to be important information later, but I just wanted to point this out because this happened not long after he became president. Okay, let's move on to the next piece of evidence or detail that I got to cover with you guys. The CIA wanted to kill Americans and use it as justification for invading Cuba. They wanted to blame it on Cuba. They put this memorandum on John F. Kennedy's desk a total of 2 times, begging him, please, John F. Kennedy, let us go through with this. We want to kill civilians. John F. Kennedy said, no, you guys are crazy. I'm not letting you do this. And I'm just going to read through their plans here. I'm going to read through some of their ideas for you guys. So the CIA, they wanted to start rumors about Cubans. Okay, not bad. They wanted to land friendly Cubans in uniform and stage an attack on American bases. And they wanted to sink an American ship near the harbor, blame it on Cuba. And then these ideas get more and more crazy as you go through the list. Like, I'm going to just scroll down here. They mention hijacking civil air, hijacking an airplane, and creating an incident in which they shoot down a civil airliner, blame it on Cuba, of course. And yeah, I mean, these ideas just get more and more unhinged. But John F. Kennedy said no, and the CIA, they didn't like that. So, okay, moving on from the CIA, we have to talk about the American Zionist Council, which is now known as AIPAC. But back then, they didn't have to register as a foreign agent, just like now, which gives them unlimited funding capabilities to our politicians. So John F. Kennedy, he thought this was crazy, rightfully so. And in November 1962, he ordered his brother, who was in charge of the Department of Justice, to demand that the AZC register as a foreign agent. And this was later withdrawn after John F. Kennedy died. And of course, they still do the same thing today, just under the name of AIPAC. Okay, let's move on to Executive Order 11110, because this order was big. So here is the text of the order. I'll just kind of summarize it for you guys. John F. Kennedy wanted to grant the Treasury the ability to issue silver certificates, US dollar that would be backed by silver. Now, what's important about this that the executive order doesn't mention is these silver certificates would not be printed by the Federal Reserve. In other words, John F. Kennedy was stripping power away from the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, it's not federal. It doesn't have reserve, guys. It's an unregulated private bank that prints our money and then they loan it for face value plus interest to our own government. Our own government cannot even print their own money, and they have to pay face value plus interest for every single dollar they obtain. John F. Kennedy thought this was crazy. So, I mean, he signed it with basically to strip the Federal Reserve of its power, as it says here, and they say with the stroke of a pen, JFK declared that the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. Which, in my opinion, would be a good thing. Because when you look at the national debt of the United States, 4.5 billion of it is from the Federal Reserve alone. But what's not mentioned here is that all of the domestic debt, which is all of this is help created by the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve just creates eternal inflation. I mean, in Trump's second term, he took a $1 trillion loan out of the Federal Reserve. So in that one instance, the Trump government owed the Federal Reserve $1 trillion plus compound interest. How would any government ever pay that off? That is the $1 million question. That is why we are $39 trillion in debt, guys. And here's an example of what one of the bills would have looked like under JFK. And these bills existed. They were being printed by the US Treasury, not by the Federal Reserve, but only for a year. And as you can see, it does not say Federal Reserve note. It says United States note, as it should. And it was easily distinguishable because they used the orange color to stamp it, unlike the green color. Okay, let's move on, guys, because we got to talk about Ben-Gurion, who was the Prime Minister of Israel. Ben-Gurion was creating nukes in Israel. John F. Kennedy didn't like that. John F. Kennedy thought Israel should not have nukes. They were writing letters back and forth to each other. And here I am on the National Security Archive.edu, guys. This is an archived letter that JFK wrote Ben-Gurion. And if I scroll down here just a little bit, he says right here that the government's commitment to and support of Israel could be seriously jeopardized if it should be thought that we are unable to obtain reliable info on a subject as vital to question of the character of Israel's efforts in the nuclear field. So, in other words, John F. Kennedy was telling Ben-Gurion point blank, we're going to stop giving you U.S. aid. We're going to stop supporting Israel if you don't stop lying to me about your nuclear capabilities. And then he signs it down here, sincerely, John F. Kennedy. Now, right after Ben-Gurion got this letter, he stepped down as prime minister. And he cited that it was because of health issues. And then, like a couple months after that, John F. Kennedy dies. So, I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Okay. Let's take a look at, sorry, what is this? Oh, yes, this is a speech. Yeah, of course. This is a speech that John F. Kennedy gave to an American newspaper. And I just wanted to read some of it to you guys because John F. Kennedy told the press, point blank, we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on primarily covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. So, John F. Kennedy, he's basically calling out the deep state right here. He's not naming them by names, but he's kind of dancing around the bush, saying that we're opposed by secret societies, by the deep state, there's a shadow government, and they probably didn't like that he said that. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about his death. So, as some of you may know, Lee Harvey Oswald is the alleged shooter in John F. Kennedy's death, the alleged killer. However, after Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, 2 days after the assassination, he was murdered by Jacob Rubenstein. Okay. So Jacob Rubenstein, he kills Lee Harvey Oswald. And while he's in jail, he's visited by a rabbi. And Rabbi Silverman visits Ruby in prison. Ruby told him that it wasn't just patriotism. He did it for the tiny hats. Okay, so after John F. Kennedy dies, you got Alan Dulles, who was appointed to lead the commission. So if I go down here on his Wikipedia page, it says right here, point blank, that during Kennedy administration, he forced him to resign. He forced Alan Dulles to resign because of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, or Cuba invasion. And then if I just look down here later in life, after the assassination, the new president, Lyndon B. Johnson, appointed Dulles as one of the commissioners of the Warren Commission. to investigate the death of John F. Kennedy. So they appointed the guy who JFK fired to lead the investigation on who killed John F. Kennedy. Okay, we also have to take a look at Arnon Milchan. Who is Arnon Milchan? Well, he has an intelligence career in which he was an arms dealer to Israel. He did espionage, big ticket arms dealing, and obtaining sensitive technology and materials for Israel's nuclear weapons program. The same nuclear weapons program that John F. Kennedy wanted to abolish. And if I go down here, click on executive producer, oh, what is that? This guy was an executive producer for the JFK film. You can bet they didn't talk about his ultimatum that he was sending to Ben Gurion in that film. So, yeah, so what do I think about the John F. Kennedy assassination? I think it was a trifecta coalition between elements of the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and Israeli intelligence that all teamed up together to assassinate John F. Kennedy, and they all had motive to. Now let's talk about his brother, Robert F. Kennedy. Because Robert F. Kennedy, in 1968, was winning a presidential primary, and this guy was likely going to be the next president of the United States. However, he was killed by Sirhan Sirhan. And Sirhan Sirhan was a Palestinian who had strong anti-Zionist beliefs, which on face value doesn't even make sense, because as I explained back here, Robert F. Kennedy demanded the AZC to register as a foreign agent. And, I mean, he was brother with John F. Kennedy. You know, John F. Kennedy, he was going to pull his support from Israel. So the whole thing just doesn't really make sense. Now, if we take a look at the ballistics findings. So, Robert F. Kennedy, he was shot 4 times. And 5 other victims were shot. 9 confirmed the shots. Sirhan's gun only held 8 bullets. Other evidence shows that there was at least 13 shots. Now, Robert F. Kennedy, he was shot close range from behind 4 times. 3 hit him. So what's damning about this is Sirhan Sirhan was standing in front of Robert F. Kennedy. So how can Robert F. Kennedy be shot at close range from behind when Sirhan Sirhan was standing in front of him? It's just a blatant cover-up, and they just do anything they can to blame it on Palestinians. And I wanted to touch briefly on JFK Jr., because in 1999, he mysteriously just died in a plane crash when his plane crashed over the Atlantic Ocean, never to be found again. It's like, how many planes just randomly crash over an ocean, say the Atlantic Ocean? Like, that kind of stuff doesn't just happen, especially to influential figures like John F. Kennedy Jr. And it was rumored that John F. Kennedy Jr. was about to run for executive office, or at least some kind of political position. But this cut it short. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know anything else about JFK Jr., to be honest. I might have to do some more research on him, but the information out there is limited. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, be smooth.